I lost my seat, my dignity, and then my husband lost everything. The moment it happened, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even stand up. I just froze. Because when a room full of people watches you be quietly humiliated, the silence is louder than any insult. It was supposed to be a simple dinner. One long table. Soft lights. Laughter floating in the air. My husband's family celebrating his promotion. His moment, they said. I wore the dress he picked. Sat where he told me to sit. Smiled when I was supposed to smile. Then his mother leaned forward. Actually, she said, tapping the table lightly like she owned it, that seat is for family. Her eyes didn't leave mine. I waited for my husband to say something. Anything. A laugh. A correction. She is family. But he didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't even look uncomfortable. He just nodded. That nod cost him everything. I stood up slowly, every face turning toward me, the room suddenly aware that something had gone very wrong. Someone pulled the chair back from under me. Physically removed it like I didn't exist. And I realized something terrifying in that moment. They weren't embarrassed. They weren't uncomfortable. They had rehearsed this. My husband's sister slid into the seat without hesitation. Glasses clinked. Conversation resumed. And just like that, I was no longer welcome at the table, emotionally or physically. I should have walked out. But humiliation does something strange to you. It traps you between rage and shock. So I stayed standing there, burning, while my husband avoided my eyes like a coward hiding behind his own success. Finally, he leaned over and whispered, "Don't make a scene." That's when I felt it. Not sadness. Not anger. Clarity. I excused myself quietly. No dramatic exit. No slammed doors. I walked to the bathroom, locked the stall, and stared at my shaking hands. Because here's what he didn't know. I wasn't just his wife. I was his safety net. The business he bragged about? I built the back end. The investments that impressed his parents? My savings. The connections that got him promoted? Mine. And in that bathroom mirror, mascara smudged and dignity shredded, I made a decision that would end his entire world. I went back out, smiled politely, grabbed my purse, and left without a word. That night, he didn't come home. The next morning, I did something he never thought I'd have the courage to do. I stopped protecting him. Within 3 weeks, the accounts were frozen. The investors pulled out. The promotion quietly disappeared. His mother started calling. His father stopped answering his texts. And the same people who watched me lose my seat suddenly pretended they didn't know him. He came back to me desperate. Apologetic. On his knees. "Please," he said, voice breaking. "I didn't think it would go this far." Neither did I. But when you let someone strip your spouse of dignity in public, you teach them exactly how disposable you think that person is. And once I learned my place at that table, I made sure he lost his. I used to believe humiliation was loud. I thought it came with shouting, insults, maybe a slap of words across your face in front of witnesses. I thought it was dramatic, something obvious enough that everyone would recognize it for what it was. I was wrong. Humiliation can be quiet, polite, smiling. It can happen while people are holding wine glasses and complimenting the food. It can happen when the person who promised to protect you just looks away. When I married Daniel, people called me lucky. He was ambitious, confident, and charismatic in a way that made rooms tilt slightly in his direction. He knew how to speak just loudly enough to command attention without seeming arrogant. He shook hands firmly, maintained eye contact, smiled like he already knew he'd win. What people didn't see was what happened behind closed doors. They didn't see how often I softened his sharp edges for him, how many nights I stayed up fixing spreadsheets, emails, and proposals while he slept. How many uncomfortable conversations I had with my own contacts to open doors he pretended he found himself. I didn't mind at first. That's what love looked like to me then: support, sacrifice, loyalty. And maybe that's why I ignored the first signs. Daniel's family never welcomed me. Not openly, anyway. His mother, Patricia, mastered the art of passive rejection. She hugged me too briefly, complimented my appearance with a tone that suggested surprise, asked questions that felt more like audits. "So what exactly do you do again?" "Oh, that's interesting. You must be very flexible." Flexible. That was her favorite word. His sister, Lauren, barely hid her disdain. She treated me like I was temporary, like an object accidentally left in the room that everyone was waiting to remove. And Daniel? Daniel always said, "They'll warm up eventually." They didn't. But he did something worse. He stopped noticing. The dinner was his idea. "They're throwing something small," he said casually one evening while adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Just family. Nothing fancy." It was to celebrate his promotion. A promotion he'd spent months hinting at, bragging about, stressing over. I congratulated him, kissed his cheek, asked what I should wear. He looked me up and down, thoughtful. "Something simple. You know how my mom is." I knew. That night I chose a neutral dress. Elegant but not loud. Hair neat. Makeup minimal. I wanted to disappear just enough not to offend anyone. When we arrived, the house was already buzzing. Laughter spilled from the dining room. The smell of roasted meat and herbs filled the air. The table was long, polished, and perfectly set. Candles. Place cards. Assigned seating. I scanned the table instinctively. There was a card with Daniel's name. To his right, Patricia. To his left, Lauren. There was a card for me too. At the very end of the table. I hesitated. Daniel noticed. "It's fine," he murmured. "Just sit. Don't overthink it." So I did. Dinner began smoothly. People talked about Daniel's work. His vision. His talent. His drive. I smiled. Nodded. Sipped my drink. No one asked me anything. Halfway through the meal, Patricia stood up slightly, adjusting her napkin. "Oh," she said lightly, as if remembering something insignificant. "We actually need that seat." She looked directly at me. "For Lauren's fiancé. He's joining us." The room went quiet. Not shocked quiet. Expectant quiet. I looked at Daniel. This was the moment. The tiny, decisive moment where everything could have been fixed with one sentence. "She's fine there. She's my wife. We'll make space somewhere else." Daniel didn't say any of those things. He didn't even meet my eyes. He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "That makes sense." My ears rang. Patricia smiled, relieved. Lauren pulled the chair back, my chair, and slid it away as if it had never belonged to me. I stood up automatically, my legs moving before my brain could catch up. Someone gestured vaguely toward the corner. "You can just stand there for a minute." Stand. At a dinner table. I felt my face burn. My hands trembled. The conversation resumed around me like I'd vanished. Daniel still didn't look at me. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. That's when I understood. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. I walked to the bathroom quietly. Locked the door. Stared at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman looking back. Her shoulders were tense. Her eyes glassy but dry. Her mouth pressed into a thin, controlled line. I whispered, "You're not crazy." Because that's what moments like this do. They make you question reality. Make you wonder if you're being dramatic. Sensitive. Difficult. But I knew what I'd felt. I'd been erased. When I returned, Daniel caught me near the hallway. "Hey," he said under his breath. "Why did you leave like that?" I stared at him. "They took my seat." He shrugged slightly. "It's not a big deal. Don't make it one." That sentence settled deep into my chest. Not a big deal. My dignity wasn't a big deal. I nodded once. "Okay," I said. And I picked up my purse. I left without saying goodbye. He didn't follow. That night, alone in our bedroom, I lay awake replaying everything. Not just the dinner, but the years leading up to it. Every time he'd taken credit. Every time he'd minimized my role. Every time he'd asked me to just handle it behind the scenes. I thought about the accounts. The contracts. The signatures. I thought about how much of his life rested quietly in my hands. And for the first time in years, I asked myself a question I'd avoided. What happens if I stop holding everything together? By morning I had my answer. And Daniel had no idea what was coming. The truth behind his success. The morning after that dinner, I woke up before him as usual. I made coffee. Organized the papers on the kitchen counter. Checked emails. Everything was normal, on the surface. But inside me something had shifted. Daniel slept. completely unaware of the storm quietly gathering around him. He thought the world still revolved around him. He thought the promotion, the accolades, the respect he flaunted were his alone. He had no idea I built the foundations he claimed as his own. Our marriage had always been like this, but I'd buried it under love, patience, and the illusion that one day he'd notice. I'd met Daniel 10 years earlier at a networking event. He was charming, ambitious, and completely transparent about his goals. He wanted power, wealth, recognition. I wanted stability, a partner, and maybe love. From the very beginning, I'd seen the cracks in his brilliance. He could talk, charm, and sell himself. But he couldn't handle the details. The numbers. The logistics. The relationships that truly built empires. That's where I came in. I negotiated contracts while he gave the speeches. I smoothed over angry clients while he smiled for the cameras. I spent countless nights rewriting emails that, if sent as is, would have ended his deals. And yet, every success he achieved, he presented as his own. Every promotion, every compliment, every nod from his investors, mine was invisible labor. For years I accepted it. I wanted to love him. I wanted to believe he would eventually see me, not as a shadow but as a partner. But that dinner, that single humiliating moment, shattered the illusion. I walked into our home office, Daniel's laptop open on the desk, emails pinging softly. The room smelled faintly of his cologne. I leaned against the doorframe and let the truth settle in my mind. If I wanted to take him down, it would be simple. All the accounts, all the investments, the connections. I had access to them, not because he trusted me, but because I had always been in control. I started making quiet notes, organizing evidence. Every investment he bragged about, I traced. Every client he claimed to have convinced, I documented. Every investor he flattered, I prepared correspondence. I didn't want revenge yet. I wanted preparation. I wanted him to understand the fragility of his ego. Meanwhile, Daniel went about his day, blissfully unaware. He strutted into his office, smiling, shaking hands, telling stories that weren't his own. I stayed home, working silently behind the scenes, a ghost in his empire. I knew his weaknesses. I knew the contracts that were vulnerable, the investors who only responded to me, the financial details that, if manipulated carefully, could bring his business to a halt. I wasn't angry at him in the conventional sense. I was meticulous, cold, calculating. I had always been the backbone, and now I had finally realized I didn't need to prop him up anymore. The first sign of trouble was subtle. An investor emailed him concerned. A contract appeared to be missing a clause, one I had intentionally left unreviewed for testing purposes. Daniel spent hours trying to fix it. Calls were made, apologies extended, nerves frayed. He didn't notice it wasn't a mistake from him. It was a reflection of how dependent he was on me. I didn't intervene. I stayed in the shadows, quietly observing, letting the tension grow. By the second week, he began to panic. "I don't understand," he muttered one evening, pacing the living room. "Why are clients pulling back? Why is the funding delayed?" I sipped tea quietly across the room, calm, collected. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I had never felt more in control. "I guess you should call the investors," I said softly. He froze. His eyes darted toward me, and I could see the realization dawning. For the first time, he wasn't in charge. Not really. Every building block of his empire, every accolade he'd ever earned, it depended on me. And now, that dependence was about to be exposed. The final blow came with the board meeting. I had coordinated quietly behind the scenes to schedule a review of all company accounts. Not only did Daniel fail to notice the errors, but the board also began questioning his decisions. Every client he claimed to have handled perfectly had discrepancies I had documented meticulously. Every contract missing, every financial mismatch. Proof that he had been overstating his role in the business. I sat in the corner of the boardroom, quiet, observing. The smug smile he usually wore faded. Investors whispered among themselves. The room's tone shifted from polite to tense. He turned to me, eyes wide. What is this?" I smiled. Calmly. Politely. The kind of smile that said, "I told you so." "Daniel," I said softly, "you might want to sit down. Or perhaps reconsider your definition of success." He couldn't argue. He couldn't charm. The truth was undeniable. Every person in that room had seen the reality he had been hiding behind for years. By the end of the meeting, the consequences were irreversible. Accounts frozen. Investors pulling out. Partnerships canceled. Reputation slipping. Daniel's world, carefully built on illusions of competence, began crumbling. And I watched. Not with glee. Not with malice. With clarity. I had lost a seat at a table once. But this time I was in charge of the table. The fall begins. Daniel woke up that morning still unaware of the scale of what was about to hit him. He brushed his teeth, dressed carefully in a crisp suit, and kissed my cheek, the way he always did before leaving for his empire. He smiled confidently, arrogantly. I didn't return the smile. I simply watched him walk out the door. By the time he reached his office, the first messages began flooding in. Investors, clients, partners, all polite at first, neutral in tone. But within hours the tone shifted. Subtle hints of doubt became clear accusations. We're concerned about the discrepancies in the accounts. We need a full audit before proceeding. This doesn't match the figures we were promised. Daniel froze, staring at his computer screen. He tried calling me, but I didn't pick up. I was in the living room, calm, tea in hand, watching the first cracks appear in the facade he had spent a decade building. The first panic attack came mid-morning. He ran from office to office trying to salvage contracts, emails flying, phone calls endless. Investors demanded explanations he couldn't provide. Clients asked for proof he didn't have. The employees who had always followed him blindly suddenly looked uncertain. And I was silent. A silent witness. By the end of the day, word had begun leaking. Social media picked it up. Industry forums discussed it. Articles hinted at a scandal in the making. Daniel's promotion, once celebrated, was now questioned. He came home that evening, suit wrinkled, tie askew, hair messy. His confidence had drained. For the first time I saw him vulnerable. "Ollie, I don't understand what happened," he stammered. I looked at him, calm, unwavering. "You were never running this alone," I said simply. He opened his mouth to argue, but there was no argument left. The proof was in the accounts, in the clients, in the contracts, and I had meticulously documented it all. Within a week, the dominoes fell faster than he could react. Investors withdrew entirely. Partners reneged on deals. Employees who had depended on him started questioning their loyalty. His mother called constantly, trying to advise him, but her tone had changed. Condescending, disappointed. He turned to me, desperate, begging, pleading. "Please, I need you to fix this. Just help me. I can't." I shook my head slowly, calmly, no emotion. "I've been fixing it all for years," I said. "And every time you thanked me for nothing. Now you fix it yourself." The panic in his eyes was satisfying, not cruelly, but justice in its purest form. By the second week, Daniel's public image had crumbled completely. Articles circulated about business mishaps, failed leadership, and incompetent management. Investors who had once praised him called for meetings he could no longer control. And through it all, I remained a quiet shadow, observing, calculating, ensuring nothing I did could be traced back to me. It was poetic justice. One evening, he collapsed on the couch, exhausted, defeated. "I don't know what to do," he whispered, voice broken. "Everything's falling apart. And I don't know who I can trust." I walked over, sat beside him, silent. "You trusted yourself more than anyone else," I said softly. "And that's why it all collapsed. You forgot that your foundation was built on someone else's work." He looked at me, begging, regretful, vulnerable. For the first time I realized something vital. I didn't need him to acknowledge me. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his gratitude. I needed him to understand, and he did. By the end of the month, Daniel had lost everything tangible. Accounts frozen. Office staff reassigned. Investors gone. Promotions revoked. And yet, he clung desperately to what he still thought was his power. His family's approval. But even there, the shift was undeniable. Patricia no longer smiled at him politely. Lauren no longer whispered behind her hand. Even distant relatives started noticing the cracks in his carefully constructed persona. Daniel's world had shrunk to a fraction of what it once was, and he realized painfully that it was not me who had destroyed him. It was himself. I had already begun planning the final step. Not to humiliate him further. Not to seek revenge for the dinner. But to ensure he could never underestimate me again. The next moves would be decisive. Legal papers drafted, documents prepared, contacts reactivated, and a calm, calculated confrontation waiting to be delivered at exactly the right moment. By now, Daniel didn't approach me with confidence anymore. He approached me cautiously, anxiously, almost fearfully. "Ollie, please. I need you," he said one night, desperation in his eyes. I looked at him calmly. Not with malice but with clarity. "You never valued me before," I replied. "And now you see what happens when the person who holds your world together decides to step back." His hands trembled as he reached for mine. But I didn't move. And in that moment, I realized that losing my seat at dinner had taught me something far more valuable than humiliation. It had taught me control. And now Daniel had none. The days after Daniel's collapse were quiet. Too quiet for him. He no longer strutted into rooms, no longer smiled confidently at investors, no longer spoke with that charm that once convinced everyone around him. Instead, he moved cautiously, always looking over his shoulder, as if the walls themselves whispered reminders of what he had lost. And I watched. I planned. I waited. The final confrontation didn't need drama. It didn't need yelling, tears, or public embarrassment. It needed precision. I invited him to dinner. A private one. Just the two of us. No lights, no cameras, no witnesses. Just a table, a quiet dining room, and the opportunity for him to finally see the consequences of his arrogance. He arrived, hesitant, suit perfectly pressed, but his shoulders hunched in ways I had never seen before. His eyes searched mine, looking for the woman he had always taken for granted. I just wanted to talk," he stammered. I gestured to the table. "Sit." He hesitated, remembering the dinner months ago when I had been humiliated. But this time he had no power. No one else was around to side with him. No family to hide behind. No empire to impress. He sat, and I poured us both a glass of wine. "I hope you understand now," I began softly, "that everything you built depended on me." He swallowed. He looked down at his hands. I thought I deserved it. I thought I worked hard. I laughed quietly. Not cruelly, but with the weight of someone who had seen the truth clearly all along. "You worked hard to look good," I said. "But I worked hard to make everything real. Every deal, every contract, every investor's trust. It was all me." He tried to interrupt. I raised a hand. Calm, decisive. "This is not about revenge," I continued. "It's about recognition. About consequences. You humiliated me in front of your family once. You ignored me when I saved your empire countless times. Now, you see what happens when someone who carries you decides to step aside." His face went pale. He could not meet my eyes. "You," he began, voice shaking. "You could ruin me completely." I smiled calmly. "I already have." Over the next few weeks, Daniel's life unraveled further. Business partners terminated contracts. Investors publicly withdrew support. Colleagues whispered about incompetence and fraud. His family, once proud of him, slowly withdrew trust and affection. And through it all I remained untouched. I had the power and I wielded it with a precise surgical hand. Not out of malice but out of justice. One evening, Daniel came to me at home, face desperate, voice trembling. "Please, Ollie. I made mistakes. I see it now. I was wrong. Can we fix this?" I looked at him. For years I had loved him. I had supported him. I had sacrificed. But that love had limits. My dignity, my self-respect, my sense of justice, those could not be erased. "You don't get to fix this," I said softly. "Not now. Not ever. You had every chance to acknowledge me, to respect me. You chose arrogance. You chose ignorance. And now you must live with the consequences." His knees nearly buckled. He realized, finally, that there was no apology that could undo the years of manipulation. the false praise, the public humiliation I had endured. Daniel's empire was gone. His pride shattered. His family's respect evaporated. And I walked away calmly. No dramatic exit. No need to rub it in. I simply reclaimed my life, my dignity, my seat at the table I had always earned. I moved forward. I rebuilt quietly. I thrived without depending on anyone else's illusion of grandeur. The woman who had once been ignored, erased, and humiliated had emerged stronger than ever. Months later, I received a call from a former investor. "Ali, are you really the one behind everything?" I smiled. "Yes. And I've never felt more free." And as I hung up, I realized something profound. Losing my seat at that dinner wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of understanding my own power. The beginning of reclaiming my dignity. The beginning of teaching a man who thought he was untouchable exactly what it meant to lose everything. Daniel lost everything because he valued arrogance over respect. I gained everything because I valued myself over others' approval. And that made all the difference.